Chapter 69. Chongmyung's gaze slowly shifted from left to right. The people receiving Chongmyung's gaze couldn't even make eye contact with him, and quickly turned away their gaze. "Don't look him in the eye. Shit, I got caught!" The third-class disciples desperately turned away from Chongmyung. Just by looking at his gleaming eyes, it was obvious that they wouldn't be able to back out if they got caught. "You!" An eerie voice that seemed to crawl its way out from the depths of hell emerged from Chongmyung. "I don't want to see you losing to those Jungnam bastards." His eyes were gleaming with madness. "I might pee here. What am I supposed to do if he comes at me with that insane look on his face? He looks even crazier today than normal. Is it because it's a full moon tonight?" Even if everyone else accepted defeat, Chongmyung would never admit it. The other may think that it's reasonable to lose to the Jungnam sect, but Chongmyung would never be able to sleep if they suffered defeat at their hands. How could he live peacefully without punishing those idiots that stole the plum blossom sword technique? "Sahyungs, you need to win. I'll make it so that you win." Everyone was desperate to escape from this demon. But even when there were so many people, why wasn't there at least one person who could speak up? But it was Jogul. With a blank face, he looked up. "What do you mean by that? To die once?" "Oh!" Chongmyung smiled when he heard the question. Sahyung, come to me." "Me?" Jogul raised his finger and pointed to his face. "Yes." Jogul looked around and saw all the other Sahyungs happily nodding their heads. Jogul stood blankly with his mouth agape as the feeling of betrayal rushed over him. You traitors. Was there no such thing as companionship? Before Chongmyung came to Mount Hua, there was strong loyalty among them. Just when did this place turn so harsh? "Come here, quick, quick!" "Great Sahyung." Jogul looked back at Yunjong for the last time, who lightly coughed and spoke. "Go already, you son of a..." He stopped himself from cursing. In the end, Jogul bowed his head and trudged forward like a cow being led to a slaughterhouse. Yunjong's eyes fell on Jogul. Chongmyung looked at Jogul and said, "You said you wanted to fight them, right?" "Yes." "It might be a bit strange, but..." Chongmyung chuckled. It was an eerie sight to see his chilling smile illuminated by the light of the moon as he held a real sword. "Sahyung is already strong enough." "Huh? It's not like your training until now was done in vain." Jogul frowned. "So we aren't too far from the Jungnam sect?" "That would be a no." Chongmyung quietly shook his head. Wasn't Lee Songbek known to be one of the strongest second-class disciples? Seeing how the other disciples treated Lee Songbek, he was definitely strong. If he had to assume what level of strength the third-class disciples would have based on that, it's similar to what I thought before. Jogul can compete fine, and Yunjong might need some luck on his side, but the other disciples had no chance. Of course, the competition can change rapidly depending on their individual physical conditions and luck, but unless heaven's luck falls on them, the other third-class disciples of Mount Hua cannot overpower the Jungnam sect. Although it isn't because Sahyungs are weak. What is it then? You've reforged your body, but you are doing the same things you did before. Body? Jogul looked down at his body. My body did change. Thanks to Chongmyung's weird training and the medicine he gave out, the third-class disciples became so strong that they could compete at a higher level. Just seeing the muscular frames that everyone had developed brought a smile to his face. Of course, it wasn't just good to look at. After adapting to the training, the disciples realized that their bodies had become stronger than in the past. Their swords moved faster in their hands, and their lower body was as strong and stable as a boulder. But it's the same thing. Is there something wrong with what we are doing now? That's what I'm going to tell you from now on. Chongmyung smiled and approached Jogul. Chongmyung's sword scratched against the ground with a grating sound. Jogul gulped and stared at his approaching figure. Sahyung. Yes? Why are you learning the sword? That in the Mount Hua sect, there could only be one answer to that. One controls the body and sword to eventually reach the greatest understanding of Tao. A sword is a tool along the path to achieving the highest peak of the Tao. There is no way this guy wants to answer. If he decided to say nothing, he would be insulted. So, isn't it to beat our opponents? Wow! Chongmyung clapped in applause. That's a shocking answer from Sahyung. It's really unsuitable for us Taoists, but that is the correct answer for a typical swordsman. It would have been better to give the obvious answer. Chongmyung nodded his head. You're half right. It's to win. So what should we do to win with the sword? Shouldn't we grow stronger, knowing that no matter what answer he gave would lead him to being verbally thrashed? Jogul answered right away. Right. However, Chongmyung agreed with Jogul's statement. You just need to be stronger. If you're stronger than the opponent, you will win. But this means things might be a little different. I don't understand. It's simple. Chongmyung smiled brightly and raised his sword. From now on, Sahyung and I are going to fight. Sahyung, use every possible means to overcome me. I will only swing my sword once. Really? Yes. Jogul frowned. Isn't he ignoring my strength too much? Jogul was already used to dealing with Chongmyung. He knew better than anyone that beating Chongmyung was impossible, no matter how hard he tried. But this fight was a different story. No matter how wide the gap between them is, it would damage his pride to lose to Chongmyung when he would only do one slash. I need to show him how strong I am. Jogul clenched his teeth and raised the wooden sword. Are you going to continue with the real sword? Yes. It might hurt someone. Maybe. Why wasn't he giving a clear answer? Was he going to cut Jogul or not? Jogul shook his head to clear and calm his mind. Can I start? Oh. As Jogul confidently raised his wooden sword, Chongmyung smiled. You seem to be quite confident, Sahyung. Thanks to you, I trained myself to death. Chongmyung smiled as he lifted his sword. Confidence. That's good. Those who wield the sword need to be confident. People who don't believe in themselves have difficulty showing their abilities. But it's a little too early. The third-class disciples are still just chicks. As Mount Hua has been developing at breakneck speed lately, it was natural for the disciples to be excited. But now wasn't the time to be confident. It was the time to solidify their basics. Chongmyung had to show them that. Jogul stared at Chongmyung with a fierce glare. Be prepared. Huh? This isn't personal in any way. Huh! Jogul charged and jumped towards Chongmyung. His eyes were burning furiously, in contrast to his words that no personal feelings were involved. It was flustering that he was showing so much killing intent. Did I do something wrong? The others would be dumbfounded and pissed off if they had heard Chongmyung's casual thoughts, but fortunately, no one could. Chongmyung silently dodged Jogul's swift sword strike. Ha! However, Jogul's sword began to make a dizzying change. Falling Petal's sword. Even though it had been less than a month since they started to learn this, Jogul was able to skillfully wield it in harmony with the 7 star steps. The Falling Petal sword was so sophisticated that those who didn't know the sword stood in awe. He sure is talented. Chongmyung looked at Jogul with renewed vigor. Judging by the innate talent in the sword, Jogul was second to none in Mount Hua. Judging by his talent alone, he was even on par with Lee Songbek. However, Chongmyung smiled. Aren't plants supposed to grow stronger when they are stepped on occasionally? This wasn't a selfish thought. It was purely for the sake of Jogul's growth. Chongmyung tightly grabbed his sword. Isn't he doing a bit better than what we expected, Sahyung? Better? Yes, it seems like Sahyung is pushing Chongmyung into a corner. Yunjong smiled bitterly. It sure does look like that. What? It looks like he's pushing Chongmyung into a corner, but not once has he been able to land an attack on him. Ah. While the others paid attention to Jogul's sword, Yunjong paid attention to Chongmyung's movement. Footwork. No, it wasn't that. Chongmyung wasn't using any special footwork or techniques. If the opponent came close then, he would back away, and if the enemy attacked, he would slip past their moves. With one step at a time, He steadily dodged everything as if he could read Jogul's movements before they were made. Honestly, it was more like watching a well-choreographed sword dance than a match. Jogul's sword cut the air only inches away from Chongmyung as if it was intentionally avoiding him with each step. Just how far ahead is he able to predict Jogul's movements? The only time Jogul fought with Chongmyung was when he got beaten or when they were training together. It has already been several months since Chongmyung came to Mount Hua, but it was his first time seeing Chongmyung spar in a match. Yunjung was able to understand the difference between Chongmyung and them. Jogul clenched his teeth and shook his sword. He couldn't hit the opponent. It was like fighting with a ghost. Even though the techniques was executed perfectly, Chongmyung avoided it with casual movements. Just 1 inch. If Jogul aimed for Chongmyung's head, he would tilt his head to avoid it. If he aimed for the shoulders, he would glide out of the way. Just 1 inch closer, and it could have been a hit or a strike or anything. It was an uncomfortable feeling. Jogul's loss that first night that Chongmyung arrived in Mount Hua was one thing, but wasn't it supposed to be different now? Even when he was doing his best, couldn't he at least hit him once? Jogul clenched his teeth and poured strength into the sword he held. Jogul's sword brilliantly shone bright blue. Sword ki? He can use sword ki? These voices from behind didn't reach Jogul's ears. Jogul achieved this feat while in a desperate situation as he was determined to pummel Chongmyung. But this is the end. At that moment, Chongmyung suddenly stepped forward. He raised his sword above Jogul's head, and with just 1 step, Jogul saw it. The sight of Chongmyung raising his sword, the world seemed to come to a stop. Yet, within this frozen world, Chongmyung's sword continued unimpeded. In a natural motion, like a gentle breeze or free-flowing water, the sword swung down. The sword that pointed exactly at him stopped. And, swoosh! With a force that made his ears go momentarily deaf, it fell on Jogul's head. I'm going to die. Jogul couldn't take his eyes off the sword in spite of all that was happening. In an instant, the life he lived till then flashed in front of his eyes. Before he even realized it, the sword touched his head. Pah! Then, with a sound reminiscent of eardrums exploding, the sword stopped right at Jogul's forehead. Thud. Jogul fell backward to the ground, staring at Chongmyung as if his soul had left his body. Then, Chongmyung smiled and opened his mouth. How does it feel to die? What do you mean? How does it feel? It feels exhausting.